Hello and welcome to the TGH College Hardwood Podcast. I am Joe. With me is Greg, as always. And we are finally down to the Final Four, Greg. We have a lot to recap and a lot to preview today, but it's been a great March with some interesting representatives in the Final Four, to say the least.
Yeah, I drew up like the worst case scenario, and we darn near had some of those results. We got quote unquote the worst result for I guess like our worst Final Four in one of the regions. There was obviously there's been some weird results. There's been some injuries. There's been some late game heroics, and then there's been that one team that's just been an absolute bulldozer. So we got a lot to talk about, Joe. Probably do things the same way we did last week. Take it region by region and go from there.
Yeah, let's do it. So we'll start off with the East region again, and the first game we had was UConn and San Diego State. Now this game was in Boston, so UConn played their first two games in Brooklyn. Now they're playing in Boston, not too far of a drive for either of those things. They beat San Diego State by 30 points, continuing their dominance. I have nothing else to say. San Diego State maxed out their potential this year. The Sweet 16 was as much as they could do. It is a rematch of the national title game last year, but the cookie didn't crumble that way this year, especially in UConn's bracket.
Yeah, just a little weird, quirky thing. I don't have any stats or info on this. Just we've got UConn San Diego State title game rematch in the men's, and going on tomorrow, we've got Iowa LSU rematch of the title game from the women's bracket. Just a weird. I'm sure somebody out there has probably already put on Twitter how many times this has happened, but just weird that we're seeing a rematch of both title games in the at some point in the field. There's not much to talk about except that UConn rolls San Diego State by 30 after San Diego State rolled Yale by almost 30. So we're guessing a UConn Yale game would have been 60. Just that's transitive property, right, Joe? So I just UConn, man, I just like, we'll talk about their next game in a little bit, but just they look like, they're unstoppable at this point.
They definitely do. I'll save some thoughts for their next game. We'll get to the other game in the region, Greg, the other Sweet 16 game. We have Illinois beating Iowa State 72-69. Looked like Illinois was really figuring some stuff out this game. There were a lot of guys who did not step up in this game, but they had Terrence Shannon scoring 29 points. Coleman Hawkins had 12 himself, really leading them to victory. And with Iowa State not having the best offense, scoring 72 points was just too much for him. So TJ Otzelberger, really good season for him at Iowa State. Again, if you looked at talent level of teams, he maybe maxed out what they could have done this year. Even the Sweet 16, as a 2 seed, maybe not like exactly what people would figure, but did a good job. It's just they just clearly didn't have the talent that some of these other teams did, including Illinois.
Yeah, if you look at, just some of the overall team stats, Iowa State shoots 46% from three. You would think you probably win most of those games. They win the turnover battle, but that Illinois offense was just too much. I'm with you. This Iowa State team, they definitely outplayed any expectation they had. There wasn't I don't want to say there wasn't a ton of talent, but just kind of something along the lines of what you said. Like they definitely overplayed the roster that they had together. Nothing, no knock on any of those players. Obviously, they were darn near in a lot of people's minds the last 1 seed, but I think I like the way you said it. They maximized the potential of that team. So a good year for them, and bright things ahead for Hilton Coliseum, and we'll see if Otzelberger is going to be a name that maybe pops up for some of these big jobs in the next couple of years, or maybe he likes coaching out there. So we'll just have to see. But it's hard to walk away from a season and be happy, after, the way this tournament, you're either the team that wins the whole thing or you exit with a loss. But they definitely surpassed what I would have thought, and probably what most people would have thought they would have been.
Definitely did that. One of their guys, Omaha Blue, is in the transfer portal. He was a very highly rated recruit, but did not play all that much this year. He averaged 2 points per game when he got in. But again, it just shows that Otzelberger did a really good job, and that's where the focus should be, and hopefully he can do more in the future for them. The Elite Eight game in the East region, we had UConn beating Illinois. Now, this was tied at 23 with like a minute and a half left in the first half. UConn did something I don't think I've ever seen: 30-0 run to take the game by storm. Now, the only thing I could think of that was even similar to this was Kentucky beating UCLA, or excuse me, leading that UCLA in a non-conference matchup. I think they were winning 41-7. They went on a 24-0 run, and it was just complete domination. The only thing I've seen like it, Illinois kind of gave up in the second half when that run was happening. It's a lot of guys not getting back in transition defense, and they just had nothing going for them. And UConn gets the win here. Their closest scoring margin in the last two tournaments that they've played in, the one obviously the one last year and the one this year, is 13 points. So that is a crazy domination for them. And Illinois, I would say this is, again, another team that we said could make a Final Four. If you're in UConn's region, though, probably not going to happen, especially with that defense. And their offensive game plan in this one was just weird. It was just continue to go into the lane and run into Donovan Clegan as much as you could, and it did not work at all. So that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw any of this, Joe, but Evan Miyakawa, for some people who don't know, there's a couple of the analytics guys out there. You got your Torvik, your Ken Palm. Evan Mia has his site. Evan Miyakawa has his site. It's evanmia.com. And he had, I guess, I didn't see this most of this year, but talked about how a kill shot is a singular 10-0 run. And teams that have a 10-0 run in a game win, I think it was 81% of the time. And if you have two of those, it's like 89% of those games, the team that has that wins. So obviously 30-0 run. I think he said it was like the second or third time it's happened in however many years. I can't remember, but when you're having that kind of dominant stretch, that's because that's a both sides of the ball. Like, not to state the obvious, but you're not just, hitting shots. You're playing defense. You're playing both ways. And I think, Joe, that's some of the things that we've said about some of these teams is, yeah, they're great on this side of the ball, but you look at the other side of the ball and it's like, you're almost having to make excuses, for your Baylors and your teams like that. Well, UConn's sitting at first in offensive efficiency as of right now and fourth in adjusted defensive efficiency on KenPom. So they can play both sides of the ball, and they proved it with that stretch. And they're proving it every round that everybody they've faced in this tournament so far.
Absolutely. UConn makes the Final Four for the second straight year. Danny Hurley making a case that he's the best coach in the sport right now, even after not having too much time at UConn the last several years here. So let's go to the West region, Greg. We have Alabama upsetting UNC in the first game of the Sweet 16 there. This is one that I think Alabama has got a lot of hate. Like, this is not the team I thought Nate Oates would get to the Final Four. We saw a lot of things go on with this team this year where there were some losses they shouldn't have taken. They had some, I would say, players not step up in the way you thought. I thought Grant Nelson would be way more impactful, but he did show up when it mattered. And especially had 24 points against North Carolina. For North Carolina, this was a game where R.J. Davis just did not have it. 4 of 20 from the floor, 0 of 9 from deep. We'll get to more about that stat later on. That didn't go well. Elliot Cadeau, a freshman we had high hopes for, Greg. I think we even had him as preseason, freshman of the year in the ACC. Both of us, I think, when preseason show. We'll have to double check that. He played 13 minutes. It's a guy who's been playing a lot this whole year, and then miraculously did not play a lot in the second half, which is weird because he actually hit 2 of 5 3-point shots, which is pretty good for him. It was a weird game overall. I think coaching did matter in this one. Hubert Davis did a good job to get this team together, but I don't understand that coaching decision with Elliot Cadeau. There wasn't many adjustments. And at the end of the day, you can't have your best player, a guy that impactful, go 4 of 20 and try to win a game this late in the tournament.
I mean, at the end of the day, Joe, we're still going to look at Carolina and consider this a success. Yes, it's a Sweet 16 exit as a 1 seed, but, we're not that far removed from them being, the AP preseason number 1 that didn't make the tournament, the first time ever. So, there was some murmuring, some questions about Hubert, and of course, no 1 seed wants to go out in the Sweet 16, but I think I heard somewhere this is the first time we've had all 4 1 seeds make it to the second weekend. It's like 3 or 4 years or something. So, one of them usually gets knocked out by an 8 seed. Obviously, we've seen some 16 seeds upset some ones, since 2019 as well. But not to backtrack a little bit, but I don't know if because obviously you and I both tweet a lot, but I literally said this is not the Alabama team that I thought Nate Oates would be taking to the Final Four. I mean, if you just look at last year's roster, it's and obviously he had some issues off the court, but it's Brandon Miller, it's Mark Sears, it's Noah Clown, it's Javon Clinnerly. I mean, Rylan Griffin and Nick Pringle were on that team, and they were big in this game, and they barely saw the floor. I mean, they each were around 5 to 6 points a game. Like, if you'd have given me $100 and said, look at this roster and look at last year's roster, one of these two teams is going to go to the Final Four. Obviously, they were a 1 seed last year, so betting odds are going to be that would be the team to make it. But still, there's no way I would have put my money on this team make it to the Final Four, especially with how chalky this bracket broke out. It got wonky last year. You'd think they'd have maybe had an easier path to the Final Four, but a lot of big teams got upset. So we were very close to just some weird Final Four results. This is one that I don't want to say. Obviously sticking to this game, I thought Carolina was going to win this game, but once Bama won this game, I had a pretty good feeling that we're going to win the next one. But let's talk about that Clemson Arizona result before we get to the Elite Eight game.
Are you saying you tweeted that out too, or are you saying I tweeted that out? Because I tweeted that.
I tweeted it out. I'll find it while you.
I need some proof. I think Greg's stealing some tweets here because I was searching your name and checking out Bama, Alabama, Nate Oates. Nothing was popping up. So maybe you did, but if so, you're stealing my brain, and that is not okay. But let's go to the other one. I'll start recapping that while Greg looks it up. We have Clemson and Arizona. Clemson ends up winning this one 77-72. This was a game that they didn't win the rebounding battle, but they played tough and physical in a way that I think got them the win in this one. They didn't have Joe Girard playing well. He had 4 points. But when you have PJ Hall and Chase Hunter and Shefflin all playing well, that'll help out. So let's go, the Arizona side of the story here, Greg. We have Caleb Love. I think you have to say his season with Arizona is a success. The last 2 tournament games, you did see some of the inefficiencies that people were talking about, but you also saw they needed him to step up because Boswell didn't play well, Larson didn't play well. Again, it's one of those situations where if those guys aren't going to be aggressive and take shots and aren't going to be afraid to shoot the ball, you need someone to do it. That's why I liked Caleb Love from the start. It just happened that he kind of ran out of steam at the end of the season with those last 2 games against Dayton, and they got away with it. And against Clemson, they just did not, with 5 of 18 shooting. And then 0 for 9 from 3, which is the first time in tournament history that 2 guys have gone 0 for 9 from deep in the same tournament day.
Yeah, that was a wild stat. And if you remember, there was an idiot on this podcast that said, "Man, I can't wait for the Arizona Carolina, that Caleb Love matchup." And I sat there for probably a good 30 seconds of great podcasting where I was just dead silence, and I was trying to pick between Carolina and Arizona. And I made a joke saying, now that I took this time, we're gonna get Bama Clemson, and it'll be a football matchup. And what happened? I was smart enough to pick it on the podcast, but not in my bracket. So, this Clemson team, I mean, like Joe, I vividly remember you bringing up Joe Girard as, a possible impact transfer when we were talking in the preseason. I remember you saying, it was going to be weird to see him in a slightly different shade of orange. PJ Hall's, been a top 100 guy, as a recruit. He's been around that program for years now. Ian Shefflin was, fun to see those students wearing the chef hats to the games. I mean, that's just, maybe they were doing it all year and I didn't notice, but it obviously it felt like he was, because I watched some Clemson games this year, and I don't feel like, he was a super impact guy, but he definitely made his mark to get them to where they ended up getting in the Elite Eight. But there was some talent on this team, man, and it's kind of weird. They started off, I guess hot in overall record, but they kind of had one of those schedules that was on the light side, so we didn't know what to think of them. And then, obviously, we've already said we got to the point where we said we're just not talking about them anymore. And then, fast forward a month or two, and they're in the Elite Eight. But Brownells, how many years do you think this buys him? It's got to be. It's got to be a couple. I mean, it's got to be at
Oh,
least, I don't know, two or three.
I mean, assuming he even does what he used to do, which was not disastrous, just not making the NCAA tournament, he's got 3 more years. If he does something stupid and like wins 9 games next year, then yeah, maybe it's a different conversation. But yeah, it buys them some time. It was a great run for them. They did benefit from, I think, some favorable matchups they had in this region. Obviously, playing New Mexico, we found out Mountain West wasn't very good. You know, Baylor the second round, that defense was pretty bad, and I think their rebounding ability really helped them against them. And then you get to Arizona, and just again, it's just Caleb Love did a lot for this team. I really think the makeup of the team was just too different. Even though I've said I liked it in the past, Boswell was struggling the whole second half of the year. We talked about that, Greg. Larson is a guy who's not always wanted to shoot the ball, and he had to have Caleb Love have the ball in his hands, and it just wasn't great. So it does buy him some years. Let's get to the Elite Eight matchup. We have Bama beating Clemson. This one's 89-82. This is, I think, Greg, we talked about it. I'll just get into it now. My tweet 22 hours ago, your tweet 21 hours ago. You read my tweet, I'm going to sue you. Basically word for word almost. And that just shows we need to do a better job of interacting with each other's tweets instead of just tweeting our own thoughts all the time too, because we're pretty bad friends to each other and don't really like or reply to each other's tweets that often. So we'll work on that. But it's interesting that we did have the same thought because Alabama had struggled this year, and like I said, I thought Grant Nelson would be just as good as Dalton Connect was. I remember saying it during the show. I'm like, yeah, Dalton Connect's good, but also watch out for Grant Nelson. And this was one of the games where he didn't play that well. They got away with it, and you thought that maybe he had to play well because of going up against two front court guys from Clemson and Shefflin and Hall. They got away with it. Again, their style of play is very dangerous to play with in March with how many threes they shoot, how they don't shoot in the mid-range. But good for Nate Oates to finally get to the Final Four. He was a guy that, I think we talked about having great regular seasons where like Eric Musselman was a guy who had bad regular seasons, but he won in March. Nate Oates kind of won in March here, and that's been something that, especially after last year with the #1 overall seed, I think people have been waiting for.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add on the Bama side. Just one other thing I wanted to add on the Clemson side. Obviously, they lost this game, the Elite Eight game, but before this game, so I don't know if everybody remembers, but they were the underdog to New Mexico, even as the being the 6th seed against the 11. A lot of people were picking New Mexico. It was a trendy upset pick. Obviously, they were the underdog to Baylor. Obviously, they were underdog to Clemson. And they weren't the underdog themselves. They were the underdog to Arizona. I did see this on the broadcast. I went to Twitter because I couldn't remember the exact stat. They trailed, even as the underdog in all 3 games before this, they trailed for a total of 50 seconds. That's a pretty darn good tournament. Mm-hmm. And the ACC in general has had a pretty stellar tournament. I'm sure they're happy. I'm sure it's not who they thought, they would represent them in the Final Four, but we'll get to that later. But good season for Clemson. They showed some stuff early in the season and I don't know, died off a little bit, but they had this spurt in them. But we know with some of these rosters, man, if you just put it together at the right time, you can make a Sweet 16, you can make an Elite Eight. It's this is obviously not a roster we would have even thought about making the Final Four, and they were very close to it, but Alabama at least makes a little bit more sense as a Final Four team. The net loved them all year. Analytics loved them for a lot, and you already said it. It's with that the philosophy that Nate Oates coaches them. I sent Joe the shot chart. It's like everything is like a bunny or a 3. There's hardly any mid-range shots. You almost wonder if some of these teams might, because of how defense is played, maybe start looking at taking a little more mid-range shots or something. Just maybe they'll be more open just because of defensive tendencies. But that's not Nate Oates. So and good for them.
Absolutely. It's something that like we don't even need to see the shot charts anymore because that's every game. They just don't do that. Like they don't shoot the mid-range jumpers. So it's like one of those things they would rather drive it and try to draw a foul or take a contested layup than a mid-ranger. So crazy that it's working as well as it is. I didn't think a college team would be skilled enough to like win a championship like the Warriors did with like based on the shooting. And I still don't think they're going to win the championship, especially with who they're going up against. So on the left side of the bracket, UConn and Bama. Let's get to the right side of the bracket now, Greg. We have the South region first. We'll do. So this Duke wins 54-51 over Houston in their Sweet 16 matchup. It is fair to say that Duke did figure some things out this tournament. We had Jared McCain step up big time. Kyle Filipowski. In this game, 16 points, 9 rebounds. But they don't win this game if Jamal Shed goes down. I mean, he goes down at the end of the first half. Best defender on this team, possibly best defender in the country, at least perimeter wise. Runs the team, can hit big shots. They had to move LJ Cryer to the point guard, and I remember saying to you, unless he scores 40, they're not going to win this game, and they just don't play this way. So, Duke, I mean, there's nothing you can do. Injuries happen. Duke, they won the game. They deserve the credit for winning the game. Houston, it does feel like man, this team would have gone to the Final Four had they kept Jamal Shed healthy, but you just can't plan for that stuff.
I 100% agree with you. It's always going to be what if, but if Jamal Shed doesn't get hurt, this team is in the Final Four. I think between Francis and Juwan Roberts, they handle DJ Burns. I think this defense and, they carry their way through the Elite Eight into this game. I mean, when Shed goes out, and it is yes, the game was close. I think it was like, I don't know, 21-20 or something. It was low 20s. And it's that type of game that Houston loves to play with, that gritty, scrappy defense, no easy shots, no open looks. Losing how many teams in the country do you think could lose an All-American type player, whether it's first team, second team, and just be like, all right, we're going to beat, another top 25 team, halfway through the game, not before a game when, you maybe have some time to plan. And even then, that would obviously be a challenge, but middle of the game, I mean, it really stinks for him because, every word I've heard about this kid, this year and last, and I'm sure, some people have forgotten, but a teammate of his, do you remember if it was last year or the year before, somebody dumped a trash can, after a loss? I think might have been when they lost to Bama. And he was the one seen picking it up. No one told him to do it. It's just like, every person I've heard say something about Jamal Shed just not only says he's obviously an awesome player, one of the top 10 players in the country this year, but he's an awesome guy. Kelvin seems to love him. Every word that comes out of his mouth about him, is good. And not just because he's his coach, but these things stink, but they happen. And I again agree with you. Zero doubt in my mind. He doesn't get hurt. Maybe it's a close game, but I think they find a way to pull it out and win. They almost did. They kept it close. I will say in the second half, even with the score close, just the knowledge that Shed was out, it just didn't feel like they were going to work their way back on top. I think Duke led most of the second half, but that's, as some would say, that's the dark side of March, unfortunately, because we just miss out on a good team, possibly making to the Elite Eight, Final Four. We miss out on what would have been ideally a Houston-Purdue matchup. I would have loved to see it on a Final Four stage. That would have been great.
Yeah, I guess that is something we're going to lose here. I will say, appreciate Houston's defense every year in the tournament. They play really well without fouling. I think we live in a world now, Greg, where if Zach Edey didn't exist and people actually voted for Player of the Year based on everything, not just offense, he probably wins it. But that's not how it works. Like, if you can't score, 12 points a game, I think what he averaged. You can't win a National Player of the Year at 12 points a game unless you're, I guess, Anthony Davis. But he obviously, a different conversation there. So Duke gets to the Elite Eight. Good for John Shire, young in his coaching career to get that far, especially as a 4 seed in a team that I don't think we were ever convinced was very good ever since the start of the year when we saw those issues. Now let's get to the NC State Marquette game, Greg. There's a game, this region obviously with Jamal Shed, Cam Jones, and DJ Burns, the players that I love to watch. And what was funny about this one, Greg, is DJ Burns was totally shut down as a scorer. 4 points for the Wolfpack big man, but he had 7 assists. And that's what he does. He draws attention and he passes and finds guys. That was the difference here, 67-58. Now, Marquette, I've been a guy who's criticized Shaka Smart for not getting into a second weekend. He did it this year. A lot of people have been criticizing the coaching. There is nothing a coach can do when you go 4 of 31 from 3, when your team is built with so many shooters and they go cold, when you have Kolek hit 1 of 5 and Cam Jones hit 3 of 12 and no one else hit a 3. This just was not your night. I'm sorry. It's that's how it goes. But NC State gets the win. They were the better team in this game, and they also just shot the ball a whole ton of a lot better, and that's just going to win you games.
Yeah, if you look at the team stats, that is. Turnovers. NC State won the turnover battle, but not by a ton. Rebounds, they won but not by a ton. I mean, the glaring difference is the 3-point shooting percentage. I don't know if you realize this, Joe. I was just, while I was looking at team stats here, NC State took the lead basically right around the under 16 mark in the first half. Never gave it up. Not one time after that. It did feel like they were in control. I don't think I realized they took the lead that early and never gave it up. I mean, that's bad shooting or not. That's pure and total dominance. Holding Marquette to 58, definitely something I'd take. It's there's not enough to say about the run that this NC State team is on. I mean, this is got to be an all-timer. It's not over. So we can go ahead and talk about, unless you got more to add, we can go ahead and talk about the next game.
Let's just do it. NC State beats Duke 76-64. Now, it's looking bleak in the first half, but then they flip a switch. Now, Greg had texted us about betting. I actually already bet on them again. So I bet on them twice in that game, and when they went down and the odds were better. Just a fun team to watch. So what was interesting to me about this matchup, Greg, DJ Burns scores 29 points. It took a while for DJ Horn to get going for NC State, but he did, and that was all the scoring basically for NC State. They had 49 of the 76 points. A lot of single coverage on DJ Burns in this game, and he took advantage. There weren't as many assists, but he scores 29. The interesting thing for me, Greg, is we started this year saying, hey, who's going to step up from the perimeter for this Duke team? Well, McCain had 32 points. Filipowski did not have his best game. He had 11 points, 9 rebounds on 3 of 12 shooting. So we were waiting all year for people to come up, step up, and help Filipowski. And yes, like Foster's out for this tournament. That hurts. But at the end of the day, it was McCain. And McCain didn't even have his best game either. He was 8 of 20, and a lot of his points were in garbage time. So this was a poorly played game by Duke after about probably after the first half or so.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where we were texting with. We have a friend that is from Raleigh, went to NC State, and he said he was nervous. Even with 5-6 minutes to go, and it just, I mean, by that point, Filipowski was out. It didn't feel. March is crazy, and you never know. And if it was my school, if it was Xavier sitting there in that situation, I would have been nervous too. There's no lead that you can tell me in that situation. I would just be like, yeah, I'll take it. No, I want it to be 30, 40. I don't care. I don't want any chance. I want to see my school go to the Final Four. I want to get Xavier on a T-shirt, hopefully someday in our lifetime. But still, I mean, you said it, Joe. I mean, like I think I said it last week. Filipowski's almost become like the backstory. McCain has had, and it's not just because McCain has had such stellar play. Filipowski struggled a little bit. And, I did see some stuff on Twitter about how Filipowski's going to be a great player at the next level, just, because of the versatility that he has. And I'm sure that's fine and whatnot. And I don't, if he was ready to go last year, I can't imagine, even with a poor finish to the year, that there's any chance he comes back. I mean, they would have to give him some kind of NIL deal to make him want to come back. I don't anticipate that. I think he's ready for the next level. I think he's exactly what the pro game wants right now. So, but it's just an interesting story to think that, this team was, man, it's just Filipowski, in November, December. And then just at some point he tailed off and McCain's star rose. And, I mean, it's still, at the end of the day, it's still a good job for Shire, because they didn't have a ton of options, and he was able to get something out of this team and make it all the way to the Elite Eight in a year that was pretty chalky in the bracket. Maybe they still underplayed preseason expectations, but you get to the Elite Eight, it's hard not to hang that as a good year. Even yes, you're facing an 11 seed, but it's a conference rival that's seen you a couple times throughout the year. They just beat you in the conference tournament. They know how you play. Like you already said, they're missing Caleb Foster. There was a lot going against them. Filipowski fouled out early, and that you said it, man. Something just flipped halfway through the game. I'm glad that I hit the pregame bet, and then I hit it was plus 420 when I hit the second one. So we made some money today.
Yeah, I will say, it's a good start for John Shire in his career. I think I said that earlier, but there were some things where you just kind of see that happened in these games that he needs a lot of work as a coach still. Like, I do a top 25 college basketball coaches every offseason. He's probably not going to be a top 25 coach. I mean, one Elite Eight appearance, whatever, that's a good run, but like maybe gets a footnote of, hey, he could be the next guy up. But there were things like, Tyrese Proctor, he went 0 from the floor for this game, and he just never really developed. And like, I don't, why is this guy not developing? And McCain comes on, but Filipowski loses it. How does that work out? And Foster gets hurt, so it was a good year. I think it's some of the things he's going to learn as he goes further on in his coaching career. But thank you, DJ Burns. It is Easter Sunday, and you do not let a team called the Blue Devils win. That's a good sign right there. So NC State makes the Final Four. First time they make the Final Four since 1983 when they won it all with Jim Valvano as head coach. That is a great story. It is a team that has had a lot of struggles over the years, and all their sports programs, I feel like, have had some bad breaks. So for our friend who went to NC State and a lot of other people that I have met through the years, through him and other people, that NC State people, they had the NCAA baseball championship kind of stolen from them because of COVID. They always go 7-5 and have the 7-5 jokes in football. They did have a couple better years under Dave Doran the last couple of years. But this has to feel great, and hopefully they can keep it going. It's just a really good story, and, I think it's very nice, and hopefully these people don't push the agenda that we need to expand the tournament, because that's just what's going to happen. So let's move to the Midwest region, Greg. One of the ones that had been one of the more boring regions in the tournament, but there were some notable things that happened here. We have Purdue beating Gonzaga in the Sweet 16 matchup. Now, I picked Gonzaga in my bracket. I said they were better than what they were the last time they played, and that might be true, but you get Graham Ike in foul trouble, which he always does, and that's just the end of the game. So I should have known better. I had Purdue preseason number 1 when a lot of people did not have them preseason number 1 for whatever reason. They had Duke or Kansas. I should have stuck to my guns there, but instead I decided to get cute. That's a lesson to me. Not stop being a dum-dum. But, Purdue gets the win in the Sweet 16. It wasn't really close after the first half. I think it was a good job by Mark Few to maximize the talent on this team. We were 2 months before this. We were talking about them not making the tournament. They make the Sweet 16 as a 5 seed. And Purdue and UConn at this rate look like they're on a collision course, just the way those two teams are playing.
Yeah, this is another roster that just kind of, like you said, a little bit light. One of the traditional, I won't say traditional powers in the sport, but, one of the, in the last, 2 decades been one of the big players, and, really only had about 6 or 7 dependable bodies, along with, I think we said similar things about Kansas and maybe a couple other teams, but get to the Sweet 16, keeps that streak going. I think it's 9 years now. There's, for a program that's in the WCC, I mean, like, even though it's Gonzaga and they've been to the mountaintop and they've, darn near won the championship, and I do hope they get one eventually so we can shut this. They'll never win the big one. That's just one of the things that gets on my nerves every year. But yeah, you're right. I mean, first half it's back and forth, and then it just second half Purdue blows the doors wide open. And I mean, like, you would expect that with a team that has a lot more depth. They just have more bodies that they can throw out there that, can contribute. Yeah, some games that, it's Edey and Braden Smith that are mostly running the show, but there's a lot of guys that can contribute in different ways, and Gonzaga just doesn't have that. So late in the game, guys are going to be fatigued. Of course, Edey, is playing, 30 plus minutes a game, and he seems to be fine, but, it's just, again, it was just a little bit of a logical thing. Purdue looks, I won't say as good as UConn, but I mean, they look like, I'm not expecting them, to have. I'm not expecting the Final 4 games to be, and I'm saying this, to be overly competitive. I think the national championship is going to be really fun, and of course, now that I say that, just like the West region last week, we're gonna get the opposite result, which will just be infinitely hilarious, and it'll be the most March thing ever. But I mean, this game was theirs all the second half.
Yep, absolutely. So let's move on to Creighton and Tennessee. This one started off pretty good, but then Tennessee kind of pulled away in the second half. Creighton made it look close at the end with some garbage time points. It was really weird because Creighton was like one of those teams this year where it just felt like if they were hitting their threes, like they were going to win the game. They hit 11 of 23 threes, so it's a pretty good percentage, 47%. But Tennessee just outplays them. That physical team, the Rick Barnes thing. I mean, I'm happy for him for getting a win, even though I do not like Tennessee. Dalton Knecht didn't even have his best game. He was 8 of 21 shooting, like 26 points, but had to do a lot of work to get to those points. So it felt like a weird game that Tennessee was so in control when Baylor was, or when Creighton and Baylor Shireman were hitting their shots. So to me, it was a weird game. but one where I think Tennessee kind of played how they want. Like, yeah, they're going to let Dalton Connect take his shots. A lot of other guys aren't going to take a lot of shots. They'll still be physical defensively. They won't get Creighton get off a lot of threes. I mean, Tennessee actually took more threes in this game, so I think it's one of those things that even though they shot a good percentage, they did a good job defending overall too.
Yeah, I mean, like if you just look at the base stats in this one, there's not anything that really sticks out. I think you're right. I mean, Tennessee just outplayed them. They finished strong in the second half. I mean, everything is I won't say identical, but it's there's not like that one thing that I can look at here and I can say, this is why because both teams had a one player have, yes, not maybe the most efficient, but have kind of that they led the team. It was their game. It's Dalton Connect for Tennessee. It's Baylor Shireman for Creighton. And then, you got a couple of side pot contributors in Zakai Ziegler and Josiah Jordan James. And on the Creighton side, it's Kalkbrenner and Stephen Ashworth. Stephen Ashworth had a couple of deep threes that kept them in the game where I kind of thought they might have been done. And I think Joe pointed out this year, at some points it was like, man, maybe they wish I would say something like, man, maybe they wish they still had Nemhard and Joe would correct me and say, hey, Ashworth's playing pretty good ball. You know what I mean? He's 2-4 from three and hits all his free throws. I mean, that's can't ask for much more from your point guard. I mean, 6 assists in the game. I don't think that if we could turn back time and flip Stephen Ashworth for Ryan Nemhard, that this result is going to be much different. So Creighton's another school that's never been to the Final Four, came very close last year. A foul call towards the end of the game against San Diego State was, ultimately what ended their run last year. Would like to, obviously, I'm all about variety and parity. Would love to see them make the Final Four eventually. Obviously, playing in the Big East, unlike they were, 15 years ago, they're going to have more opportunities. So, hopefully eventually they break through. Obviously as when we're talking about this stuff, we don't necessarily like specifically like, wow, we have our teams and we love and cheer for, but I just personally, I like a little bit of variety. Some people say they hate certain sports, like the NBA, because we kind of know, not maybe in the last couple of years, but we know who's going to be in the NBA finals before the season starts. This sport kind of unpredictable. Although someone did, have his number one team in the preseason is now in the national title from this game or from the next game. So if you want to move on to that one, Joe.
Well, I will. I'll say my national title champion pick in the bracket was Creighton, and that is done. I meant
your preseason
right.
ranking.
I'm just being transparent. I don't like when people aren't transparent. I'm being transparent. I picked Creighton this year. I got down to a final of UConn and Creighton. I thought some of the games they played this year were pretty interesting with how Creighton did beat UConn this year, and that's tough to do. But that's what I got a lot of shit for that at the family Easter thing when you took Creighton. Oh yeah, well all right, I'm not going to be Mr. Basic and take UConn. I thought UConn may have lost a step, and I didn't see them playing as well as they did last year. Pretty much from the start of the season when we talked, we didn't think they would, and then even when they got to the tournament, I thought, okay, like they're not going to run through the competition like they did this year. So it was something different. I'm okay with my selection of Creighton. I thought they were a lot of fun. I would also like to see them go to a Final Four at some point, but we'll move on to the Purdue-Tennessee game, a rematch of a Maui Invitational game, just like Purdue faced with Gonzaga, too. Purdue wins this one 72-66. Now, we have to talk about this region having a lot of the players I think people want to see in brackets. Like, this is the Baylor Shireman versus Dalton Connect last round that, Greg, you mentioned. We have Zach Edey versus Dalton Connect, the two front runners for Player of the Year. Although Zach Edey's probably going to win it, 99% chance of that. That was the name of the game here. Edey, 40 points, 16 rebounds. Dalton Connect, 37 points. Really kept them in it in the second half with some big shots. It was a mess of a game officiating. It, I think, is the most highlighted game where you can see that Zach Edey's officiated differently and inconsistently. Some games where he gets away with stuff that other people don't. There's some games where there's ticky-tack fouls called. There's some games where, he's not the beneficiary. He fouls because he's just big. So that highlights for me, Greg, that there is a big officiating problem in the sport. We've already known that, but it highlights it for more, I guess I would say, casual fans who are just tuning into the Elite Eight. And what sucks is this was a good game. Purdue deserved to win, but there is a storyline out there, and it has some truth to it that officiating is so wrong in this sport, but also just because of this one player who happens to be big. It's just crazy.
Yeah, I definitely think officiating needs to be discussed. I did see, and I don't have it in front of me right now, but I'm pretty sure Purdue had a double-digit, I don't know if you want to say advantage or whatever, but fouls was a double-digit difference, I believe, in every game in this tournament for them. If it wasn't double-digit, it was at least like 8 or 9, was the difference, meaning they got a lot more free throws than anyone they played. And some of that has to do with, just the way they play. Obviously, they go to ED a lot on the post. There's going to be a lot more fouls on plays, down in the low block and in the paint than there are in the open court, outside the 3-point line. That's just how basketball works. They do play more in the area where fouls occur more. But still, it's a pretty glaring difference. And Joe and I are no strangers, even though we both love the sport, to at times how putrid the officiating is. At times it's bad. We can, if you want to go for a singularity, we can go back to the Samford, Kansas play. I mean, there's not a lot that are that bad, but if you look through most of these games, there's a lot of things that are questionable. I know at times, obviously we get a little bit of a microscope on these things because we watch these games more, but Kentucky had some weird whistles in certain games. It stinks because I did think that this game, we didn't get a classic finish. We didn't get a buzzer beater. We didn't get a late, but I thought this was a somewhat of an instant classic. One of the better games that we saw this year. The officiating does take away from it somewhat. Again, it didn't come down to the last minute. It was pretty much not in doubt late, but I mean, we got monster performances from the guys. I mean, this is the kind of thing that you're going to see on a highlight reel in a couple of years. You're going to see Dalton Connect nailing a bunch of threes in a highlight reel. You're going to see Edey backing dudes down. The only thing with him, Joe, and I know I've said this before, but sometimes it just feels like, yes, he gets a lot of points at the free throw line, and shooting over 70% from the free throw line is good for him as much as he gets to the free throw line. But sometimes I just feel like it's just not a lot of field goals from him. Like sometimes he commits to that over the shoulder, and listen, when he gets it down, I think that's the thing I kind of realized. Edey's value is not necessarily because he shot a little over 50% from the field in this game. Obviously, when he gets fouled, that doesn't count as a field goal attempt, but his positioning is really where he gains value because it's what gets the double brought to him, which opens the floor up for everybody else. Or it's, if he's down low enough, it basically gets him a bunny, because it's not a lot of him making these ridiculous, like, covered shots. A lot of times he's able to elevate over guys and it clanks off the back of the rim. And I think that's sometimes where that narrative of he's just tall comes from. Because I mean, people are right. Like the ball it's not like pure every time he has one of those, baby hooks. So I could see where people say that. It's still obviously he knows what he's doing. He's, he knows how to play with what he's got, but at times it's not the prettiest thing to watch.
It's not. It's a boring brand of basketball. I'm different than you. I think he does provide a lot more. I know you're not saying he's just tall, but provide more than just free throws. I think or positioning too. I do think he makes a lot of those ones where it's over someone. I do think that's a big thing. He's made not as many field goals as he did last year, but it's still over 8 field goals a game he's averaging. Like you think about that, that's a minimum of 16 points with how way he plays without any free throws if he makes 8 field goals a game. So I think he's just very good. He's tall and he developed. I think that's what Matt Painter does with these guys. He gets these guys in and they come in, and whether it's Matt Harms or any of these guys over the years that he's had, they come in and they're not very good. They're not recruited by like the Kentuckys and Dukes of the world. They're not, and he makes them a lot better. So I know, again, you weren't saying that he's just tall, but there is that narrative that you were trying to put out there that people say he is just tall. He is very good at basketball. It's not going to translate well to the NBA. We know that. But for college basketball, especially in the way they play, you're right. Him drawing the double teams is huge. I just think he provides such a weapon because he can finish if he's covered one-on-one. If someone helps, he can still finish over them. If they help, he can pass. And you can just throw it up to him at different times. So it's something like we haven't seen in college basketball, and it's coming at a time where everyone else is going small. So it's a perfect storm for Purdue to maybe get the job done here. But let's get to the Final Four matchups, Greg. We have UConn and Bama to start this one off. So a 1 seed versus a 4 seed. What are you thinking here?
I'm gonna go with UConn. And again, this Bama team has that potential to just light it up from deep. You know, they obviously play a certain way. The thing that we're going to see maybe is Klingon taking away some of those looks near the rim that they like to go after. They may end up having to take a few more mid-range shots than they're comfortable taking. Joe, that is one thing I didn't say that I kind of said, I think on Twitter somewhere, but this is, we talked about Klingon in the preseason, and we thought some people had him, a little bit higher than he should have. People had him preseason, first team All-American, thought that was a bit much. He's finally stepping up. I mean, he had a monster sequence in the Illinois game in the middle of that run where it was a block at the rim. He came from the opposite block to make the deflection, and then goes down the court. They give him the ball on the other block, and he drop steps and slams it. He's having a great impact on his team. Finally being, a big presence that, some people were projecting him to be. Maybe Bama gets hot, but I got UConn as my national title winner. I got them, in my national title game. They have yet to even stumble outside of the first half of Illinois, and that did not last very long. So I have no reason to change. There's nothing. I would never change a result that I have already picked because, Joe, we're men of our word. But there's nothing I've seen that would even make me want to at this point.
See, I think in a bracket you can change your pick if you notice something, or if Jamal Shed gets hurt for Houston and then they win, like you could say, "Oh, I think NC State's going to win the next." I think you can change it, but you can also, that's why we do a weekly podcast. We can talk about it as things unfold. I will say, Klingon has had a way better season than I thought. He missed, I think, about 5 games this year with injury, but the thing was with him, that first team All-American talk was too much. It's not saying that he can't be an impactful player to win a national championship with. It was just, hey, he's got to get through so many other big guys. I know a lot of people are doing like the different things of like, you can have 5 centers on the first team. I think that's BS. If you can't mix up, I know positionless basketball is becoming a thing, but I don't think you can mix it up. You have 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a center, or however you want to break it, 3 guards and 2 forwards if you want to do it that way. That's just how it works. So what you're talking about, he has to get past Edey. He has to get past Baycott. He has to get past like Kalkbrenner. He's he's a very impactful player. He's going to be one of the reasons, probably maybe the key reason they win a national championship. But his stat line is just Ryan Kalkbrenner, and probably worse than Ryan Kalkbrenner overall. 2.5 blocks per game is around what Kalkbrenner's averaged for the last couple of seasons, and only 12.9 points. That's very good and helps you win, but that's why the first team All-American stuff was just too much for me, because even you have to score 15-ish points, grab 10 rebounds. He only grabbed 7.5. That's what you have to do to be first team All-American in my mind, and we're going up against so many other big guys. So he's had a good game, or he's had a good season. He's going to be the reason they win this game, because Alabama shoots a lot of threes. As you said, Greg, they also do layups. That's what they try to do. He'll be able to take away a lot of the layups just by himself. Alabama doesn't have the best inside presence, especially to go up against someone as big as Donovan Clingan. Also, Alabama is a 3-point shooting team, and they're playing in a football stadium. Depth perception is off. We don't see a lot of Final Four national championships with guys just shooting lights out. It is a tough game. Even if one guy has a good game and is able to deal with it, there might be someone on the team that needs to shoot well for Alabama, and they just don't because of depth perception. So when you're taking away the rim, you have the depth perception issue with playing in a football stadium. I can't see like a team like Alabama winning a game like this. I would have said if it's in a basketball arena, they have a better chance. They can just go hot, and things happen in college basketball. But I would say of the 2 matchups, which is crazy, I have utmost confidence in UConn to win this Final Four matchup, probably more than I've ever had a feeling that a team is going to win a Final Four matchup in my life. So if you want to go bet on it, they actually are favored by 11.5 points right now. Gamble responsibly, all that fun stuff. But the spread on that game is actually larger than the Purdue-NC State game, which is just odd considering the seeds. So, Greg, let's get to the right side of the bracket now. We have NC State and Purdue. We have DJ Burns versus Zach Edey. I'm hoping for a good game, but like you said, the spread is pretty wide. It might be the largest spreads in the Final Four games collectively. I think that I've ever seen. I don't know.
you said the spread is it's wider in the. I didn't hear the exact numbers you said. You said it's wider in the UConn Bama game than it is in the NC State Purdue game. To me, just that makes a little bit more sense to me because UConn is just rolling. Obviously Purdue is good too, but this NC State team they're just red hot. This is 9 straight they've won now. They won 5 in the ACC tournament. They've won 4 here in the NCAA tournament. It makes a little bit more sense to me. Is it a double digit spread for NC State Purdue still, or is it like 7.5, 8.5, 9.5? What is it?
9.5.
Okay, so yeah, so it's not quite. It's barely under double digits. Still a wide spread. You're right. I mean, like now that I've put out into the atmosphere, out into the universe that we can't wait for this UConn Purdue national championship. It's gonna be Bama NC State. That's what's gonna happen. So mark it down, guys. Go ahead and place your bets now. I mean, the team, they're just winning games, and this is not going to be one of those revisionist history where we've taken like a couple of teams in the past, like I'm trying to think of who we've said was it a situation where they got hot or were they actually good? And this team was not like good for a long stretch of time. There's not like any stretch that you could pick out from this season. They were never in the ACC talk, and obviously the ACC got a little bit less credit than maybe it should have, but still, this team just got hot. That's it. We're not going to suddenly next year have them, starting off like FAU or something in the top 5 of a preseason. They're, they might make an appearance in Joe's way too early, top 25, but an appearance at the very back end is probably all we'll see from them. This is just a case of a team playing its best basketball, and sometimes that's all you need. But it's probably it's winning. We've said it before. It's not anything new that's been said. There's a difference between winning 4 games and winning 6. There is a huge difference. Mm-hmm. And I think that, as much as obviously this has been a fun story, this is, and we're still going to get that DJ. Don't get me wrong. I think they're going to go out with a bang. We're going to get DJ Burns going up against Zach Edey. We're going to get to see Zach Edey. I think he's, not going to be able to, he does some of that, kind of those elbow clears. You're not going to be able to do that to DJ Burns. And, they have a couple of guys that they can throw at him between Diarra and who else am I forgetting? Is it Middlebrooks? They got a couple of bodies they can throw at him. It's not going to just DJ Burns not going to have to play 35 minutes. This is going to be an interesting game. But obviously, there's more impact players on Purdue. There's Braden Smith. There's Fletcher Loyer. There's, Lance Jones has had a great season. I'm still picking Purdue. I don't really have any reason to pick NC State, no matter how hot they've been. I mean, again, this is a great story. It's not this typical, Cinderella story that we get. It's a power conference team, but it's still a wonderful story. Everybody has been sharing, of course, this afternoon, that NC State is a 3-pointer away, or a made free throw by Virginia away from their not even making the tournament. And Kevin Keats is fired because they would have lost that ACC tournament game. So it's one of the wildest runs I've seen in my lifetime. Maybe the George Mason, maybe the VCU, because they're obviously smaller schools from smaller conferences. But this team was barely above 500 and now is in the Final Four.
Yeah, definitely something to consider. I think the other teams were just probably better runs because the mid-majors never get the credit they deserve, and NC State does have better players, and talent always wins out in the end, usually, and even in college basketball. Greg, I'm going Purdue to win. It's not a secret here. DJ Burns has struggled with guys who are bigger than him, like 7-footers. You can basically play him one-on-one in this game. Like Kyle Felpowski, like 6'10", 6'11". He can play one-on-one with him. He can't guard DJ Burns one-on-one. Zach Edey can guard him one-on-one. He can't get his moves off. He can try to keep on spinning, but Zach Edey's right there with that length. I think he can still pass and do some things, and obviously I hope for the best with him, but I think Purdue's going to win. It's the only thing you could do is try to pressure the guards more. They have a week to try to put a game plan in. Even then, it's just one of those things where they have the rotation of bodies. We've seen that before. Even Gonzaga, like I said, I thought that was going to be the difference, even though Ike could get in foul trouble. They had 3 or so big guys that could put on Edey. They haven't played a good big guy all tournament. They avoided them. I mean, Tennessee doesn't really have the best big guys this year. Creighton, they avoided Kalkbrenner. Obviously, like other guys in the tournament, like Coleman Hawkins, who's not even that tall, but like a good big guy. Baycott, other brackets. Obviously, Klingon we talked about. I mean, it's just they've had this bracket that I think was perfectly designed for them to get to the Final Four. They're there now. They get NC State. We're getting the collision course for Purdue UConn. On top of that, Greg, we talk about all the time. Just one last thought on this game and on the other game too. You have to be in the top 25 efficiency offense and defense. NC State's 40th and 45th in offense and defense. Alabama is like 100th in defense. You can't win 6 games. It's just analytically you can't win 6 games in a row. I would love to be wrong. I would love NC State to win, but Purdue is the pick for me, which means we have the same final after the Final Four picks. UConn and Purdue. Greg, who are you going with?
I'm going to stick with my bracket, but I think that would be a very fun national title game. I hope there's no injuries that we get from it. You know, that's obviously one of the things that we didn't necessarily say out loud that, you know, could derail any sort of thing. That's the unpredictability of sports, though. So, you know, barring any setbacks like that, I think we do get UConn Purdue, and I think it's a fun game. But I am, you know, for the moment, sticking with what's in my bracket, and I'm going with UConn.
I'm going with UConn too. They've been the best team this year. They have a guy who can neutralize Edey a little bit, hopefully, for them. And I think if there was a coach who would figure out a way to pressure the guards in the way that, you know, he is crazy on the sidelines, it might be Dan Hurley. So I will take UConn. I'm praying to God the officiating is fair in these Final Four games in the final matchup. I know it's tough to officiate Zach Edey. The NCAA is literally advertising for officials because they're losing officials at a high rate because they get paid thousands of dollars per game. So when you think about how many games these guys work on a day-to-day basis, they are clearing probably millions of dollars over the years. It's tough. It's a tough job. You always get criticized. I'm just I hope we get some good officiating because it would be a shame if in the Final Four DJ Burns gets 3 fouls early on. If in the final Klingon gets 3 fouls early on. If even the other way, Zach Edey gets 3 fouls that he doesn't deserve. So that's what I'm hoping for the most. But UConn to win it for me as well. I just think they've been pretty dominant here. Greg, we have 2 more things to go over, I believe. Really quickly, we have Pat Kelsey getting the Louisville job out of College of Charleston. In turn, we have Chris Mack taking the Charleston job, which is interesting that those guys are 2 Xavier guys. And Chris Mack, I would have thought, would have had a better job. And then also John Calipari staying at Kentucky. I know we've been talking for almost an hour on a show where you didn't have as many games to recap and talk about. But general thoughts on any of that, since that was the coaching news the last week.
I won't say the Pat Kelsey thing was completely out of left field, but it was. I mean, I felt like we had heard some other names that were in the running. You heard a lot of Richard Pitino. You had heard a lot of stuff. Pat Kelsey was, you know, his name's been tossed around for a couple of jobs in the past couple of years. There's a great video of him walking into the Louisville facilities, and Joe obviously hates Louisville as a Kentucky fan, but it was a nice moment for him to be like, "This is my office." If you haven't seen it, go look it up. You know, it just obviously a guy that, you know, has been around, been to a couple of places, been on the Xavier staff, so good for him. The Chris Mack thing just felt, I get the job is open, and former Xavier guy was just in that position. That felt out of nowhere for me.
Yeah,
you know, I got nothing on that one. You'd have given me 50 guesses. I don't think I would have guessed Chris Mack for that job.
And what's weird is Pat Kelsey resigned from coaching at Xavier as an assistant under Chris Mack, and there's a lot of rumors out there you can read on message boards. I'm not going to get into it, but it's like they might not have, like, you would think like maybe he recommended like, hey, you should come down here. It's Charleston, like it's a nice place to live while you get, like, this is going to be the job you take to the next stepping stone you get. And honestly, a lot of Louisville fans are realizing how good Chris Mack did given the circumstances there too, especially with Kenny Payne. So that was weird to me. Pat Kelsey, yes, Cincinnati guy. I think he can do well. It's probably like a B minus hire, just because I think Louisville is a top 10 job when they get things going right, and they do make a lot of money. I think he can be. I think he will do well. It's just one of those, like, you probably should be able to hire someone who has a better track record, like not like Kentucky level where you can almost get anyone you want, but like right below that. So that's the only thing I'll say is I think he can be good. It's not going to be a flashy hire, but in 2-3 years they could be making the tournament, making some runs too.
I mean, to be fair, Joe, you know, when Dusty May got hired to Michigan and we thought, you know, maybe he might have been the guy for Louisville, we started looking around and saying, who are they going to hire now? it could have been worse. So I think a B-ish grade is probably good, but it definitely with the situation that the program has been in, and this isn't just the Kenny Payne years. It's been the national title getting vacated. It's been the scandal. It's been, obviously there was even issues with Chris Mack when he left and stuff. It's just been thing after thing after thing after thing with that program. It's in a state of disarray right now. So the fact that they're able to get someone that is still a little bit more of an up and coming coach. Again, like you said, not a big name hire, but at least someone who's regionally known. I would say that's a small victory. It's not big, it's not splashy, but better than it could have turned out with the way things were looking.
True. The way they get NA hires, if they could get someone like Otzelberger, Underwood, I don't even know if he would take that job, but someone like that, because they do have the history and the money to get someone like that.
Let me just give you a hypothetical. Nate Oates is still playing. If they lose, like in the last game or the last week or so, obviously, Iowa State lost this weekend as well. So who knows if they would have gone after TJ, but does either of those guys, if they lose, if they have an early an early exit the first weekend, do those guys get phone calls before Pat Kelsey or do you think they were on Pat Kelsey?
So you say Nate Oates or who?
Otzelberger. Both of those guys lost at some point this weekend. So I'm assuming they didn't just call Pat Kelsey on Saturday and ask him to be their coach. It's probably been going on for a little bit. What I'm saying is, does this hire maybe look different? Because there's talks of this sometimes. Is what would the Texas job would have looked like if somebody would have exited early? That kind of thing. So if both of those teams are out, they lose in the first weekend. They're obviously then you're not going to make a phone call to a guy that's still in the. I guess you could, but
they do. They do all the time. They call their agents. It's a thing. So that's why I was confused by the question. I think what people don't recognize is the Ed Cooley story about how he was already checked out of Georgetown or Providence to go to Georgetown. That happens. So I don't know. I think Nate Oates would not leave for the Louisville job. He's making $6.2 million per year. He's obviously shown he can get to a Final Four at Alabama. Otzelberger, I think, is a different story. He's making, I think, $2 or $3 million a year. Louisville is a much bigger step up in terms of budget-wise and everything, too, where it seems like Alabama's at least willing to put money into the basketball program a little bit more now. So, I don't know. I think that they could have gotten Otzelberger. I don't know if they could have gotten Nate Oates, even if they started negotiating early just based on that stuff. But I will say the last part here, Greg, John Calipari returns as head coach at Kentucky. Very surprising they have the AD release a statement and do an interview with John Calipari basically saying that they actually have an okay relationship. They're both disappointed. And both of their legacies on the line. AD, Mitch Barnhart hired him, and John Calipari's been there, and they've had some rough seasons and a couple good regular seasons in the mix there, some bad regular seasons, but ultimately not winning in March. And the way that John Calipari does things might need to change. He's looking at maybe adding some older players. And for the first time in history, actually talking players into coming back to school as well. So it's not ideal, but we talked about it last week, Greg, and it's just there was no one that you could say this guy is Kentucky's coach. This is the next one up. There's just not anyone out there. So it's one of these I guess I get it, right? I kind of get it. Maybe he convinces Reed Sheppard to get back because Reed Sheppard seems like he wants to come back. The sources are saying 80% chance he does come back, which would be great for college basketball. But it's one of those, I guess you bring him back. I guess he still coaches well regular season. You see the flashes of his teams. But this is almost feels like a last ride type of thing. Like a last dance thing like Michael Jordan. If he doesn't get to a Final Four next year, it's over. They'll find someone else. It's just this is what they almost had to do given the situation of, the recruiting class coming in, the players he could convince to come back because they're all riding with Cal, and then also just not the market for a coach that you really want to see with the guy standing out. It's kind of my impression.
Yeah, the only variable you didn't mention there, which we've said before, is just the money. $33 million buyout is a lot. I had heard some talk this week that some of the major donors just didn't have not that they don't have the money, they didn't feel like writing a check for that. I don't know, maybe you heard something different, but okay. Well, I heard a couple people say that I can't remember. Is it the Kraft family or something said they said we don't want to write a check for
They
that kind
did
of money.
they did they're involved in like politics stuff now too, so it makes it weird to buy out a coach when you're politicking in the state. But it's the the rumor was that they had, first of all, that the boosters had raised enough money and were ready to do it basically after Kentucky lost, right after. And then also, they weren't concerned about it for two reasons. One, football schools, this buyout is nothing. You look at what Jimbo Fisher got, and we're Kentucky, so that's like, we can do this. We're a school. And then also that he would get another coaching job and that buyout would come down by a lot. So those were the issues. I mean, you could be right too. I mean, we were all talking about rumor mill stuff. So I just, the things I saw was that they were ready to get rid of him. Mitch Barnhart basically sat with them, and I think assessed the situation, was like, hey, I just don't see anyone to hire. You have to change the way you do things. And I'm sure John Calipari said, yeah, I need some more support here. So what is going to happen, Greg, is they're going to have probably an older roster next year, a couple of transfers in. They're going to try to get guys to come back next year who could go to the NBA for the first time ever. NIL is changing that part of the landscape. And then they'll also, seems like they'll have maybe some new assistants and take some of the control that Cal has been using to his advantage at the start of his career, and not to his advantage later on, and taking some of that control away from him and having more structure that is aligned with the athletic department. So that some things will change. That just depends on how much, or it will actually result in wins.
So I don't have it in front of me, but what does the scholarship situation look like? How many recruits they have coming in? How many guys can they convince to come back? Antonio Reeves is done, right? He's got no eligibility left.
Trey Mitchell's
I think
done.
I mentioned to you, Trey Mitchell's done. I think I mentioned to you, obviously we talked about Reed. I said, maybe Justin Edwards was a very highly ranked recruit. He had, a few games where his star shined. It's like someone you could maybe convince to come back. Just like trying to make sense of, because how many transfers could they actually bring in? I just don't know how many between recruiting class coming in, guys you want to, what are we talking? 2-3 transfers, which can be impact. I mean, that's enough that it can be impact. But
so they have 6 commits for next year. 4 of them are signed. I don't know if they'll all stay, but they have the second best recruiting class behind Duke next year. They have Trey Mitchell and Antonio Reeves gone, and I think they'll have to figure that part of it out, because you could get 2 transfers to basically replace those guys, knowing that some of these guys will transfer out. You could just play some more sophomores if you get them back. I would say I'm pretty confident Rob Dillingham is gone. Not as much allegiance to the school as Reed Shepherd, basically because of Reed Shepherd's family. I think we've seen some of these guys go pro even with the NIL situation. So, like, what was it last year? Chris Livingston went to the pros and said it was because he had a promise he'd be drafted in the first round by the Bucks, and then the Bucks basically screwed him over and did not take him and made him an undrafted free agent. So his agent told other teams not to draft him because he was going to the Bucks and he wanted to play for a winning franchise. So there's guys who go who always maybe should not go. That's going to be the thing. Is like, which guy decides to go? Is it Justin Edwards, who's like maybe a late first round pick, but he's a late first round pick because this draft class stinks? Is it, does DJ Wagner, who I think would benefit greatly from another year in college to improve, because I think he had a solid season but could do better. That's where it comes down to. And they already have Adu Thiero, who entered his name in the NBA draft but also in the transfer portal. He said that he might come back. He's just keeping all his options open. And it might be a thing where Kentucky, with those guys, they say, hey, you're either going to the draft or you're gone. As much as we love Adu, and Adu is one of the toughest guys on the team and a kind of a glue guy, Kentucky has to move on, because if they're sitting there waiting for other guys to come in, the transfer portal's already, people are committing to new teams already. Like, they can't always sit there and wait, and that's what's held them back in the past. So maybe that's why Calipari told him to do that. Of like, hey, we have to do what's best for us. You do what's best for you. We'll see if it works out in the future. So that's just the changing landscape of college basketball. A lot of things have to change at Kentucky for things to get right, and a part of it is they can't play the same game that, like, Clemson can play. Like, they can go get a transfer portal guy tomorrow because they don't have guys going the NBA draft at the same rate Kentucky does. And, are you coming back? Or are you not coming back? That's just how it is. So, plenty of issues there to fix. Greg, any final thoughts for the week?
Can't wait for the Final Four, man. We might have a little bit of a lackluster, maybe. We might have a little bit of a lackluster Final Four Saturday, but I think that title game is going to bring everything we could ask for and more.
Absolutely. So my last reminder to like and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. Like and subscribe if you get it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you do it, it will help us out. Give us a rating, 5 stars, hopefully. But if not, we will take the constructive criticism. Helps us on. We've grown a lot during this season. Greg, I will remind everyone as well, we will be back next week. It will probably be Tuesday or Wednesday because remember the national championship is on a Monday night. And we will record and have the recap of the Final Four and the final game. We will also talk about, Greg and I this week will talk about a possible off-season schedule, whether it's once a month, whatever it is, and how we'll go about that as well. We'll update everyone before we sign off for the whole year. But a lot of basketball to be played. I'm excited. For now, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.